and I'm speaking with Rowena Hurlbut in her home in Ames. Do I have your permission to talk to you today and record your pictures and what you have to say?
Yes, you do.
Thank you so much. You have a long career in Ames, but before we talk about your contribution to the Ames business community, please first tell me your birth date and where you were born.
I was born May 20th, 1917, on a farm south of Webster City, Iowa.
So your father at that time was a farmer.
Yes, he was.
Did he like it a lot?
No, he did not like the farm. He didn't have a background of being a farmer. But my mother thought I had 3 older brothers, and she thought it'd be a nice experience for him to live on the farm. And due to the fact that my grandfather had 3 farms, he put my father on this farm and later then gave it to him. About the time that we moved off the farm, I was 10 years old, and we moved then to Livermore, Iowa.
You probably got some lessons from living on the farm.
Oh, I enjoyed the farm. I would like to be outside. I was sort of a tomboy. And so I wanted to be with the older brother. And then I had one brother that was not quite 2 years younger. Mm-hmm. So we would be outside and, gathering eggs and things like that. And then at one time I even learned to milk one certain cow that no one else wanted to milk. But my mother wanted me inside to help her, which was too bad because I didn't enjoy that at all.
So then I know your father moved into more of a business aspect, being a manager of grain facilities.
Yes.
So do you think maybe you got some of your knack for business from him?
Possibly, and also my mother. She lived, of course, quite a few years before me, and her father died when he was in his 40s. So in those days, they had someone that was more or less looked after the family. So she went to business college and then worked for him in the bank. And Mr. Randolph was very good to her. He was a cousin to Randolph Hearst.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't think of the name, but anyway, she used to write quite a bit of correspondence to Randolph Hearst, so she has a good many memories of him.
That means that you had a good outdoors background and you had a nice education in a one-room schoolhouse and you graduated from high school. Most young women of your age graduating from high school probably got married, but you didn't.
No. I went to college at Morningside for 2 years, and then I went to Tobin Business College because at the time Morningside College was more of a music school. I enjoyed it a lot because I was able to go to a lot of the operas, and one time this was sort of amusing afterwards, but at the time it wasn't amusing to me. The Chicago Opera Company came and performed Rigoletto. Well, they asked that 2 people from the university come and be a part fill-in. So I was appointed as one of them. And we enjoyed it a lot because they were Italians. We couldn't understand a word, but there were a few, of course, that gave us instructions that could speak our language. But we had a dressing room, I think, on the 4th floor, and we had a very elegant costumes for the pages. And then later, this was the thing that bothered me. I was supposed to be the lady that was killed at the very end. So they put me in a gunny sack, and you know how rough those are, and no air. Well, anyway, here this soprano was singing away, and I don't know, I must have gotten restless or whether I couldn't breathe or what, but anyway, I moved, and I shouldn't, of course. And some of my roommates at college, they said, well, you weren't dead. Oh, I was.
That's a good story. Here's a business student in a gunny sack with an Italian opera. Now, you went to college during the Depression.
Yes.
And so you were fortunate enough to be able to afford the tuition.
Well, I did work part-time when I was in college. Not too many hours, but a few. Mm-hmm. And partially the reason why I stopped at 2 years was because I had a brother younger who was going to junior college in Fort Dodge, and he wanted to then continue on. And I thought, well, it's better that a man get a degree than for me, and I figured that I wanted to be in business anyway. Mm-hmm. So that's why I went then to Tobin Business College there in Fort Dodge.
Mm-hmm. And you learned, as you said, accounting, shorthand, typing, and so then you started as a bookkeeper as your first job after Tobin College.
Did.
Mm-hmm.
I started to work for Stacy Fruit Wholesale Company, and I enjoyed that a lot. I worked there until we were married.
Mm-hmm. And how did you meet your husband?
Well, I met my husband, he was a manager of the Fort Dodge News Agency, and it was only a block from the Stacy Fruit Wholesale mm-hmm. Company, and I used to go down there for Cokes and candy bars and things, so we became acquainted, and then we were married.
So once you got married, you got interested because your husband was employed in news agencies.
Yes.
All right. So tell me the towns that you lived in before you came to Ames.
After he left the Fort Dodge News Agency, he went to work as a manager at the Dubuque News. Mm-hmm. And he was there until he went into service. And then upon his leaving the service, we came to Ames, Iowa, which was in 1946.
When you came to Ames, was someone selling the Ames News Agency?
They didn't sell it that first year. We worked for them as managers. Mm-hmm. And then the next year we bought the Ames News Agency.
Because nowadays people often get their news in electronic ways. I think let's take just a little break and talk about what a news agency was. What was that business on Main Street in Ames?
Well, we were the wholesalers for all of Story County, and then we also traveled to Boone, and then there's a small town west there. I can't think of the name of it right now. But anyway, each time that we went to, we had 2 distributions a week. Mm-hmm. And our drivers would take the trucks and go to these drugstores, bookstores, any place that handled paperback books or magazines. And we always had a list of certain magazines that had to be recorded as to how many they had on hand, and then if one location had too many, maybe the driver would pick up some and take to someone who was out of that mm-hmm. periodical.
That is incredible, because now if we just want to get some current news, we might get on the internet, but that was really labor intensive. You had to know your product. You had to know what product was at a grocery store, and then you had to know how much product to go somewhere else. Mm. That was a lot of bookkeeping.
We made the distribution out the week before, And then, like, we had a huge, long table, and we would take, like, Good Housekeeping, Newsweek, and we'd put them all on the table. And then we'd use this sheet to tell us which dealer receives certain periodicals.
Now people might just check with Amazon.com and get their paperback, but
I know.
but you were hands-on. You had to, the publishers would contact you. And you
Yes, they came to see us ever so often and would double check our figures. And of course, we had records that we had to send into them as well. After the boys would deliver the magazines, we had to figure out the percentage of sale and all of that.
My goodness.
And then we also handled newspapers like the Chicago and the Minneapolis. And
So did you have to go out to the grocery stores and drugstores and bookstores and Ames and kind of court them? Or,
no, I didn't do that.
but somebody in your bit.
My husband was the manager for a while, and it was when he had been home just a short time after he was in service. His health broke down and he died. So then my one son that lives here in Ames was the manager for several years.
I'm still interested in the number of people that it took just to get, a number of hours it took to get a magazine on the grocery store shelf.
Well, I wouldn't have any idea how many hours that was.
Well, maybe you can tell me about your typical day at the news agency. Yeah, let's say in the late 1940s, early 1950s. We'll go back then. Can you remember that? What was a typical day like?
Well, we would go into the office, and I would make out the distribution as a rule, and or my husband, and then we would, all the news magazines and books were put on the table and distributed according to the numbers. And then the drivers would come in, and they would be leaving about 8 o'clock in the morning. So this was done, say for instance, the day before, to get all these the twine put around them so they could handle the bundles easily. And then, of course, when they'd come back with certain ones that were off sale, then we had to take a ruler and tear off the top 3 inches of the title. And with the books, we tore the whole front page. Now that changed in later years. The affidavits were sent to the publishers because they said, we're spending too much time. It just wasn't feasible to
Right, when
do
the
that.
volume got that
That's
big.
right.
Can you tell me, I know that the actual news agency, what is the address on Main Street? So
221 Main.
221 Main. The news agency was actually downstairs. So that meant you were hauling things up
It
and
was
downstairs.
downstairs and upstairs.
And upstairs.
So the books were kept upstairs and the magazines downstairs. So it was a lot of work, but in those days, we didn't think about how hard we worked, but we did.
So how long was your day? You get up really early in the morning, and would you work until 6 or 7 o'clock at night?
Well, my husband would go before I did because at that time I had children and I would take him in the buggy to work. And then I would leave maybe 4 o'clock and he wouldn't come home till later then. But there was a time that the retail store was open nights, so then once in a while he'd have to work at night because he would hire part-time people to help. And then the children, the boys particularly, as soon as they were old enough, and even before they went to school, they'd go down and work and tear off the covers. And then when they were in school, they always left when the classes were over and went to work. So they didn't have much companionship with the rest of the class, I'm sorry to say.
I think they prospered, though. You told me what they were doing, and they
Yes.
prospered. They've done well. When you started in 1946 on Main Street, did you have any opportunity with this really hard work to get to know your business neighbors on either side?
Oh,
and
yes,
down the
they would
street?
come in particularly to the store, and we would visit with the different retailers on Main Street. And of course, not so much of the magazine dealers and things like that. My husband was acquainted with them when we go around quite
Right.
often.
So upstairs was the books, downstairs was the newspaper, and then your retail operation had like the tobacco and the candy and magazines.
Magazines and
such.
books.
Did you ever work on the retail sometimes?
I did work for a while until I started having the Hallmark shops. Then that changed it because I was too involved with those. 'Cause
Right.
that took a lot of time.
So let's go back kind of to the 1940s and 1950s again, when you and your husband just got started on Main Street. I know you had to eat lunch sometime. Did you pack your lunch, or were there luncheonettes that you went to on Main Street?
I think we packed our lunch. Because at that time, the first year, Walt and I really took care of the agency and the retail store together. And I even took my older son, who was only 3 years old. So he was a very quiet boy and well behaved, so we were able to do that. But otherwise, it would have been a problem. I probably couldn't have taken the other son because he's more active, but
Now, you started when your shop was really tiny. Did you grow? Did you buy some space?
well, the shop that is there now was divided in two different businesses. It was our agency and a barber shop. So we finally bought the barber shop and made it into one building, which still isn't very large.
Yes, it's hard for me to imagine the retail shop and your business being just half of that.
I
My
know.
goodness.
But we still had the entire basement at that time and the entire upstairs. So that helped.
Uh-huh.
If that had been divided, it wouldn't have been large enough.
I'll re-ask my question. If there were people you knew in mayors or city councils or any of the people that you had a chance to interact with in Ames.
Well, Art Luck was one of them, and also Mr. Harrison. And then Marion Logan later was very active in the chamber, and I was an Altrusa member, so we were well acquainted. And
Altrusa was really important for women at that time.
yes, it was.
And
It was international, and we did a lot of good things for the different
and at that
communities.
time, women could not be in Rotary.
Oh, couldn't they?
No, they couldn't, and that was just about the only thing that women could do that were in business. That
Well,
they
that's too bad.
were in leadership positions. I know that you have had so many businesses opened in terms of Hallmark shops.
Yes.
And I know that you were in Boone and that you were in Jefferson and that you were even went as far as Waterloo. And I'd like to ask you, where or how did you get the ideas to do those things that you wanted to expand? Where does that come from?
Well, part of that was due to Hallmark. They would say, "Are you interested?" Well, of course, when Walt was alive, we had a store on Main Street, 221 Main, Lincoln Center, and Boone. And then after he died, I was given the opportunity to open a store in Jefferson and Waterloo, which I did. And then shortly after that on East Euclid in Des Moines. And then later in West Ames and also West Des Moines. So I had a total, I think, of 8 stores at one time, maybe more than that.
And you were doing that at a time when most women were retired.
Well, yes, because I worked till I was 88, but I started much younger, of course, but I enjoyed it, and it was interesting to work with the different representatives from Hallmark, and also then I had gifts in the store, so those representatives would come. And then on top of that, then I would go to the gift shows. We started going to the gift show in Minneapolis, and I enjoyed that. It was a little smaller than, we then went mostly to Atlanta. And that became a little bit too much for me. So at the very, end of, before 2 years that I quit the stores, my my son here in Ames would go to the gift shows.
Because of all those store locations, you had the opportunity to meet lots of normal citizens. I know you weren't the manager, but you did come in and check on them. And I think on Main Street, I think Mesvinsky was a regular customer of
Yes,
yours?
he was. That was when Walt was alive. He used to come in so often, and Walt and he would enjoy visiting with one another.
And I think Grassley was in one of your shops somewhere?
Well, he was in the Boone store. He, at that time, had just started in politics. And, of course, he still goes around, or travels around to the different cities. And so I enjoyed talking with him.
And I'm also going to return to your theme of being a woman in business. Now you mentioned I think you mentioned Mr. Harrison at Union Story Bank.
Yes.
And did you have an occasion to ask him for a loan?
Well, at the time that our business was growing with the agency, we decided to buy a big retail, or not retail, but wholesale building out on East 13th Street. And so I can't tell you the year. I still can't figure that out when we moved out there. But anyway, I asked Mr. Harrison for a loan, and he was very happy to accommodate me and didn't even have me sign a note or anything, which I thought was unusual.
Well, that speaks to your credibility as a businesswoman.
Well, I suppose he presumed that with all those Hallmark shops, he could get enough money to make up for it.
Well, I'll still return to, I think you're being humble. I think your reputation as a good businesswoman probably preceded you.
Well, thank you.
When a person is successful, I just have to ask the question, what do you think contributed to your success here in Ames? What helped you last in business so long?
Well, I think first place we had a good product. And then it took a lot of hard work. And I had managers at each store, but I went to each store at least once a week, and those in Ames more often. So I kept close touch on everything. And even though I had managers, I still more or less called the shots, if you want to say it that way.
And so you could probably spot trends too.
Oh, yes. There were certain trends in the gift business that were wonderful. And if you happened to get in on the ground floor, that was great.
And were there some people that helped mentor you, or did it just kind of come from inside you? Did you have anybody to look to kind of help guide you in this?
Well, I think the Hallmark representatives helped me a lot at the stores. But otherwise, I didn't have anyone that helped me.
I was just thinking back, did you have any teachers at Tobin College, or would you think to yourself, maybe what would my mom do, or something like that? Did that ever cross your mind in terms of no? Well, I hate to ask this because I know you worked so hard, but you started your news agency in 1946 and continued until you were 88. And I know that you were involved in the chamber and Altrusa, but tell me the kinds of things, if you had time, that you and your husband did for fun.
Well, we would go on trips ever so often. Not too often, however, because there were a lot of hours involved in both of our businesses.
Mm-hmm.
But we played golf, and we belonged to country clubs, so we would participate in some of their activities.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also belonged to Red Friars, and I can't think. We would go to different things out at the university.
Mm-hmm. Now, Red Friars, I haven't thought about that for a long time. You even had orchestras, didn't you?
Yes.
Yes, and was it at Memorial Union?
Yes. And there for a while, Walt and I and two other couples took dancing lessons in Des Moines. And we thoroughly enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm. And how many people would come to Red Friars on Friday night? I mean, like 10, 20, 40?
Oh, lots larger than that. Because, you know, the Memorial Unions are a large place.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty well packed when we...
Uh-huh.
Because people probably in those days didn't have too many things to take up their time.
Mm-hmm. And
it was formal.
Yes, I was going to say you dressed up for it.
Yes, we did.
But wasn't it just in the cooler months of the year? You didn't do it during summer.
No, I don't believe we did.
Yes. And was it every Friday night? No. Sure
no, it wasn't. I think only once a month.
Once a month. Okay. Mm-hmm. But what fun.
Yes, it was.
What fun. Some orchestras were probably better than others.
Oh, yes, but I can't even remember them now.
Did you go out to dinner beforehand, or did you?
We generally go out for cocktails, and because most of us had families,
Mm-hmm.
so we meet at our different homes for a cocktail before we go.
There you go. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. You were so busy, I can't imagine. I think about women nowadays, and they have lots of help in terms of working outside of the home. You know, there are people to help take care of children, and there are quick ways to cook and that kind of thing. But you didn't have that in when you were having your career. Some of those things weren't around.
My mother lived just a block from us, so she would help me sometimes with babysitting or particularly I remember ironing. And then finally she got to the point where it was too difficult for her to iron, so I hired that done. And then in later years, it seemed to me I had a lady come every week and do the cleaning in the home. This is when I had so many Hallmark shops.
Yes.
Even though Walt wasn't alive, I still... had so much to do.
I think about you on the road, going to those 5, 6, 7, 8 stores in all manner of weather.
I know, it was difficult in the winter to particularly go to Waterloo. There were roads that would drift shut, sort of, and I always was a little anxious to get home.
I'm sure you were. Well, just in closing, tell me, since this is for the Ames Historical Society, how it was to have a business in Ames. Are you glad that you had your news agency business in Ames?
Oh yes, I think Ames is a wonderful location for any business because you have such a variety of people. And I think the university helped us tremendously in our business.
Because we're a town of readers.
Yes. And particularly in those days. Now, it might be different now.
Mm-hmm. Your business coincided with the golden age of newspapers.